Alright, me. It is Friday, May 8th, and I, today, during substitute teaching, finished reading Neil Gaiman's Anansi Boys. This was not the book I intended to read today. I'm part of the way through a massive piece, and then forgot that book at the theater. So read one of my spare car books, which is a wild thing to just have on hand. But yeah. This is the second piece by Neil Gaiman that I've read. I have yet to truly see this kind of massive appeal in a lot of ways, right? I mean, it's the writing is super archetypal, which is fine of itself, but it's not like, it also feels in a lot of ways very fanfiction-esque in a lot of ways, right? Except instead of the fanfiction being based off of other works of, contemporary or modern fiction or modern media, it is instead based in and around folklore and mythology, right? Which we just decide to have a fancy name for it, in illusions. But this is, that's what it is in a lot of ways. And so I've yet to truly see that love and of why Neil Gaiman is so widely read. But, that's that. This specific piece in folklore and mythology is based around Anansi, who is trickster isn't quite the right word, but it's probably the closest, kind of like, I guess, jester would be maybe a better word. But jester, trickster, god within Western Sahara, I think that's where it originates from, which was then taken over across the Atlantic during the slave trade, and was still fairly prevalent in the Caribbean islands, and it's still relatively, I believe so. But the sort of with Anansi is very much this. I think the best way to put it is this function, or this movement of stories going from being all about violence and strength to being about cunning and about wisdom and about doing things smarter, not harder, right? And that's really what a lot of Anansi is. Inherently not truly good or truly evil, just kind of existing. And so, like, in terms of what this book does, right, if we were to look at this as being a piece of fan fiction, which I argue it certainly is, right, it is like any piece of, you start with this base character, and then we imagine a world in which Anansi can have children. And so this follows the child of Anansi. But then we also then envision a world after that, which is that magic can still be performed in various ways. And that child was then split into two because of a minor incident that occurred when they were really young, of the jester part, or the trickster part of Anansi's child gets put into one body, and then everything else gets put into the second body. and then the story goes from there, right? And like that's really inherently what the basis of the story is, right? And then after that, it's not, to me, there's not anything truly special about it in a lot of ways, right? It's just pulp fiction, which is fine and it's still enjoyable, right? But it's not like this. It's not a groundbreaking masterpiece that I think people often claim that Neil Gaiman stuff is, at least up to this point of what I've read. And like, right, and you know, you're basing your interactions off of that, right? Is that you have Anansi, who within folklore is this god that in some way is both spider and human, because that is the way that all gods work within this subsection of mythology, is that they are in some way human and animal, and they are both and neither simultaneously. And Anansi very specifically is spider, and it just goes through the cunning of it all, right? And yeah, that's kind of it, right? Is then you have this thing in which you have two people that make a whole. One of them is this suave and cunning and you know, interesting person in a lot of ways, and then the other one is the stability of it all and the humbleness of it all in a lot of ways. And they, you know, neither can truly function without the other, of where they can get by and they can survive, but they can't complete and be a whole thing and a whole person without the other, right? And that's kind of just part of it. And yeah. Like the other Neil Gaiman piece, this is another one of where like some of the mythology and some of the folklore gets explained pretty well, and it gets pretty well documented. Some of it is like real hammer at home type stuff, but then some of it is just like, oh yeah, and then this happens, and it just kind of gets dumped on the reader with no real expectation, right? That's the way it kind of feels for a huge chunk of the final bits of it's just kind of like, oh yeah, we're here now. Oh yeah, we're here now. Oh yeah, this is what this is. This is what we're doing this now. Including the mermaid at the end, of where suddenly there's a mermaid. I know that at one point his password is mermaid, but you know, that's that. Yeah, so that's another thing with this, and I assume that will be the case with all Neil Gaiman books, of where it's just like you just suddenly get dumped on your head if you got to figure it out. And then yeah. There's also just some weird kind of exposition stuff in here, right? You have one of the major through lines of the book is this relationship that I can't remember his fucking name, Charlie has with his girlfriend, who was then becomes his fiance, which I also cannot remember her name for the life of me. I cannot remember her name for the life of me. Rosie. Charlie is dating Rosie, and then Anansi dies, Charlie's dad dies, learns that he is a child of a god, and that he has a brother, and to talk to the spiders, get to the brother. Charlie does so, Spider comes into his life, and then we have this, I think it's supposed to be like this spooky, kind of almost horror-esque, doppelganger-esque story, but for like 5 chapters we have this ongoing thing of where Spider has moved into Charlie's life and is imitating Charlie and is just taking over Charlie's life and doing what he wants with it, which then like is terrifying for Charlie, right? Because it is it becomes this whole mess of Spider is the one that is actually seeing Charlie's girlfriend and now fiance, or this whole fiasco with with Charlie's job and the embezzlement and things, which is another like this C story that's going on that like it's there and like you forced a tie into it but like there's no reason for it to be there, so that's all going on. But like the one thing that like is really like that's strange becomes this relationship between Charlie and Rosie and Spider and Rosie. Specifically, that we go on this whole kind of diatribe about how Spider and about how he views women as being replaceable in a lot of ways, and that they are objects to him, but then ends up falling in love with Rosie, right? But then also we've gone through this whole bit through this huge chunk of time with Charlie of where Charlie is upset in a lot of ways that Rosie has decided that she wants to wait until they are married to sleep with each other, which is totally fine. And then we just kind of get it dropped on us at one point that, oh yeah, by the way, Spider was pretending to be Charlie and actually ended up sleeping with Rosie while pretending to be Charlie. And Rosie doesn't know that it wasn't Charlie, it's actually Spider. And all this stuff, right? And it's like we have just read what is actively a non-consensual relationship occur directly in this book, right? Which does not go well with the other Neil Gaiman allegations. And it just doesn't, it's like, why do you feel the need to have this written here, right? Why make such a big deal out of the fact that there's this strain in this relationship between Charlie and Rosie in which Charlie wants to have sex and Rosie doesn't, only to then immediately, as soon as Spider is introduced, have Spider and Rosie, Spider start dating Rosie, pretending to be Charlie, have sex with her while pretending to be Charlie, when we also have this other ongoing piece of where Spider can manipulate people's thoughts into doing what he wants them to do, or what he wants from them, right? And it's just, why is this here? We could have done this without this piece, or we could have told this story without this bit of information, right? There are plenty of other pieces and to get this understanding of where Spider is ruining Charlie's life because Spider is focused on the immediate gratification of things, and Charlie ends up being focused on this kind of long-term reward and long-term planning, right? We could have done that without including this scene. And then the other scene that really sticks out to me of just like, what are we doing here, is the description that we get of Daisy, of where we get the description of Daisy and her entering the police force, and presumably coming from what is described as two fairly liberal parents, and she wants to be in the police force, and yada. And like, Neil Gaiman kind of dunks on the parents for being presumably more liberal. And then Daisy comes in, and Daisy's super smart and super intelligent, can do all these things, but she chooses to be a police officer. And then we get like 2 paragraphs of like, and her parents warned her that like it was going to be like sexist and racist and misogynistic. But it wasn't, except for the fact that no one thought that she was a police officer, and no one cared what she had to say at all. And everyone looked down upon her and treated her as a secretary. But that was totally normal, and that was totally fine. The fuck do you mean, Neil Gaiman? That's inherently what this means. Yes, is she in a different force of the police force, right, of where she's focused on cybersecurity and cyber threats and things, and so that's more looked down upon because it's not boots on the ground stuff, I guess. But do you not think that the whole description that you gave of her being treated completely and absolutely unfairly by all the other members, including effectively treating her as a secretary, does not have something to do with the fact that she is a woman, or that she does not fit in with this hyper dominant white culture that she exists in, and is instead a mixture of, I think they said Ethiopian and somewhere in Southeast Asia, I think it was the other one. Do you not see the flaw in your own writing there, pal? And then we get it again at the end, of where she's still a police officer and she's still like trying to do the right thing, and like, oh hey, there's these people that are kidnapped and I've been held at gunpoint, and the police commissioner just calls her, just goes, yeah, sure thing, little lady. Neil Gaiman, do you not understand the issue that you've just put forward again? Right? And it's like, that's just like such a tone deaf kind of deal, to like, you actively dunk on these 2 characters that are only in for like 2 pages. And Daisy's parents, you dunk on them for 2 pages. Say that nothing was the problem and that everything was fine, and then immediately write the character and write her problems as being misogynistic and being a victim of misogyny, being a victim of sexism, being a victim of issues with race. It's like, what are you doing? What are we doing here? So yeah, that's kind of it for Neil Gaiman and Anansi boys, right? Certainly it is important and it is very interesting to try and give mythology a more modern setting and introduce it to more people, right? That's always that's super important in a lot of ways, right? At the same time, it's just like there's nothing, right? It becomes an amalgamation. This entire book is like this weird amalgamation of like parts of traditional stories involving Anansi, right? And like, yeah, like it's good, and it's an enjoyable read, but it's certainly just like a lot of like, there's certainly parts of it that are just like, why are we doing this? Why is this included here? But yeah, I think that's it. It should also be of note that this is probably, at least hopefully, if everything has gone right, the last book that I will read, or will have read, while in the high school I graduated from, which is very interesting. So that's another fun little milestone. But that's that. That is Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. I still have another Neil Gaiman piece. I do have American Gods to eventually read, but I really cannot see myself reading any other Neil Gaiman after that. So that's that.